What is your view on how the EU should manage its budget or in future? Where should the revenue come from?
I think that we should raise the revenue in a simpler way. We currently have a mixture of revenues based on a GNI, so on something similar to GDP. This is fine, but we then have own resources based on VAT. This is a very complex own resource, and we don't really need it, so I think we should abolish that. There is a link to the British rebate here. Now, when Britain leaves, this will be very unfortunate, but the advantage is we can get rid of the VAT own resources. This would greatly simplify the system, and I think we can also simplify the other rebates, because there's quite a number of countries with rebates. So if we made these rebates simpler, if we abolished the VAT own resources and replaced it by GNI resources, the system would be a lot simpler. It would be based on tariff, revenue, the traditional own resources, and GNI own resources. And starting from there, we can then think about new things to be introduced. Now, introducing new things, something like EU tax, is very difficult, because in the current institutional framework there is a ceiling on the budget. So if we introduce a tax and, for instance, we raise it, the idea would be that citizens see that they contribute more to the EU budget, but in fact they don't. Because of the ceiling, the additional revenue will be neutralized by a cut in GNI contributions. So in this framework, EU taxes don't really make sense. That's what I would suggest. Let's keep it simple and focus on GI contributions and tariffs.
Are there other sources that you would introduce? For example, where would that funding come from? Some of the MEPs have suggested a carbon tax. There are other suggestions. Financial transaction tax has been proposed in the past. Are there other sources that could generate revenue?
Currently, the money comes from the national budget, and each member state decides how they want to raise taxes. Member states are living with very different tax systems and very different economic conditions, and the principle of subsidiarity says how they raise the revenue is best decided by themselves. It would be possible to introduce an EU-wide tax, like a carbon tax or something, but again, if we do that, this would just reduce GNI contributions. Apart from that, I think Europe is the region in the world with the highest tax levels globally. This is a risk for our competitiveness, for economic growth. So we shouldn't introduce more taxes. We shouldn't increase the overall tax burden. The point of having the EU budget is in principle to reduce the tax burden, to do things more effectively than the member states. So this should allow us to reduce taxes. I would strongly recommend to avoid introducing new taxes.
What about how the money should be spent? Would you make a change to the current distribution of the budget? Where would you spend the money?
Yeah, this is the real issue. I think we need to spend more money on projects that really do generate European added value, on projects in the EU-wide interest, like foreign policy, internal security, migration. These are important issues. Currently, a lot of spending goes to national projects that generate local benefits, but projects that the member states could easily do themselves. The trouble is that there is a pot of money, the EU budget. Every member state wants to get the money back, and that's why they prefer having a mediocre or even a bad project in their own country compared to doing something which benefits the EU as a whole.
Member states are going to be reluctant to totally give up any sovereignty, in a sense, of how this money is distributed. How can that be overcome, and is it realistic to think that it can be wholly overcome?
I think the member states need to understand that collectively having these I want my money back projects is really irrational. I think we could have a smaller budget, we could have smaller contributions from the member states, but then spend the money better. That would be the deal, and politicians at home would have to explain this to their electorate, but if this means we spend less, this should be explainable.